What's up, skeptics? Welcome to another episode of Reason to Doubt, your source for all things skeptical. I'm Jordan, joined with Jared, and we have a special guest today, Tim O'Neill of History for Atheists. How's it going, Tim?
Hey, good. Good to see you guys again.
Joining us from across the world in Australia. So Tim runs the blog History for Atheists, which is an excellent resource. What we're going to be talking about today is Christmas. Since Christmas is coming up, you know it's Christmas because at least in our hemisphere, things are getting colder. You see lights coming up. You see people talking about how Christmas is pagan. All the usual signs that Christmas is right around the corner. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is actually our second crack at this topic. And the first time we talked about it, we basically used Tim's website as like our source. It was perfect. So we thought we'd get the man himself on to talk about it.
Sure. And look, it's one of my favorite topics because every time, at this time of year, every year, it comes up all the time. It comes up on Twitter. I was just saying before that, I had a long discussion with someone on Twitter a couple of days ago where they were insisting that it's definitely pagan. And we were just discussing just before we started the recording why people get so invested in this idea that what actually happened was Christianity came along and stole a pagan holiday and made it into Christmas. So there was a pagan holiday on December 25th, and it was stolen. And if you Google origins of Christmas, you will get literally hundreds of thousands of articles saying exactly that. Because every Christmas, some poor sap who has to work on Christmas Eve.
That's bang out another article. Yeah,
some journalist gets, do the Oranges of Christmas article. And so they just Google all the old ones and just rehash the same claims, which we'll be talking about in a moment. But I think the reason that a lot of atheists and skeptics sort of like it is that it makes Christianity sound a bit either sneaky or stupid, particularly modern Christians who get very agitated about, the whole fake war on Christmas thing that you guys get in America every year, where you can't say Happy Christmas anymore and all that crap.
Oddly, those stories are always like somebody's brother's cousin got in trouble for it. I've never actually seen anyone get in trouble for it.
That never happened. But, Happy Holidays apparently is a terrible thing to some Christians. And so the response to that is, well, you Christians are stupid because it was originally a pagan holiday anyway. And you see that as a response to Christians making that complaint all the time. So this is one of those things that just everybody knows, and everyone knows it because it just keeps getting repeated. And this is despite the fact, as I'll go into in detail, it's mostly wrong. It's largely bullshit. So what I want to do first, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, this is a lot of the times when we tackle a topic on this channel, some of them are, kind of highbrow. A lot of them, though, are easily debunked. Like if you did really any research at all, you'd find the answer. This one I have a little bit more empathy on, because if you just do like you said, just a quick search, you're just going to get this story and presented in reasonably reliable sources usually. And so I can understand why this bit of knowledge, and also it's a fun fact. It's like, even if you're not using it in a mean way, it's neat, but unfortunately, we as skeptics take it as a sacred duty to destroy all fun on the internet.
Well, even as a Christian, I had in the early days of X or Twitter, whatever it's called now,
it's Twitter. Elon doesn't tell us what to call it. It's Twitter.
I believe I had posted something that said Merry Xmas, and I got berated by a bunch of Christians. And I was like, well, the X is the Greek letter, for Chi, which is short for Christ. And so, but even saying something like that was taboo because it didn't specifically say Christmas.
Gotta put that Christ in, man. Gotta put that Christ in. All right. So before we jump off, I just want to really make clear the claim that we're talking about. So the claim is that Christians, in some sense, stole a pagan holiday. And so Christmas wasn't a Christian thing. It was a pagan thing that they took in some way. And it was, so basically it's not a Christian invention. There's nothing uniquely Christian about it, is the claim. And a pagan, for those who may not be aware, is a non-pejorative term in this context. It just means basically someone in the ancient world who wasn't Christian or Jewish. And the other option is pagan. In this case, probably a Roman pagan, but lots of different flavors of it.
And I think further than just the festival and the date, but also the customs. So when you do that Google search, you'll come up with a whole lot of articles that say, all these things that we do at Christmas, they were originally done in this pagan festival. So giving gifts, eating, drinking, getting drunk, and Christmas trees, the decorations, all that stuff. It's all pagan, and this is the claim. And when I say it's mostly wrong, there's a couple of things in there that I think possibly do have a pre-Christian origin. So I'm not absolutely ruling it out. I'm not saying it's all completely wrong, but a lot of it, most of it is, and a lot of it is at best dubious, and some of it is just total nonsense.
And some of, like you said, with the feasting, like people eat food when they celebrate things. It's not like it's not stealing. It's just like, I don't know. The pagans weren't the first ones to come up with drinking either. So
I think we'll get into that as we go. But maybe if we start with December 25th, so why that date? Because the argument is that why that date? Well, there was a pagan festival on that date, so that's why they picked that date. And people often say to me, like, there's nothing in the Bible that says it was on December 25th. So anyone who says that that's when it happened is stupid. I think most Christians understand that it didn't happen necessarily on that date, and that's just the day that it's celebrated. Though apparently there are some who don't realise that. Never overestimate the capacity for people to get things wrong. But the argument is sort of that. Now, the first thing to point out is that, the Bible doesn't give us a date. The Bible, as in the Gospels, actually don't really give us much of an indication of what year he was born. Because the only two Gospels that actually give us a birth story at all, it's the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. The others didn't think it was important, that whole virgin birth thing. Yeah, we won't put that in. So Matthew and Luke are the ones that give us the Jesus stories and the Christmas story. And the traditional Christmas story that we get is actually a kind of an amalgam of those two, because everything that's in Matthew is not in Luke, and everything that's in Luke is not in Matthew. So there's shepherds in Luke. There's no shepherds in Matthew. There's wise men in Matthew. There's no wise men in Luke. The other thing is that they're telling completely different stories, and the stories are even set 10 years apart. So the Matthew story has Herod the Great in it. Herod the Great died in 4 BC. The Luke story is centered around the census of Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, or called Cyrenius, and that happened in 6 AD. So they're 10 years apart. So the two stories, despite what Christians will try to do, they can't be reconciled. So we don't know what year. We don't know. The gospel writers seem to be pretty unclear as to when he was born, even year-wise, let alone what date. Something you often hear people say, and I get this a lot from Christians, but also ex-Christians, that it couldn't have been in December because shepherds don't look after their flocks at night time in winter. They only do that in spring when it's lambing season. Except, unfortunately, that's not true. At least in the hills around Judea, to this day, they do pasture their sheep in those hills in December. And that's because it's a very arid part of the world. It doesn't get a lot of rainfall, but it does get rainfall in winter. And so the one time a year you're actually guaranteed to get a bit of grass there is late December. So there was a news story in the Guardian newspaper a couple of years ago, quite recently, talking about how this practice of pasturing your sheep in the hills around Jerusalem at this time of year, so in the area of Bethlehem, it was being disrupted by the Israeli military. So it still happens. So if you come across that, just tell them they're wrong. That's not true. Not that means that he was born in December. It just means that objection to him being born in December is based on a false premise. So why December 25th? We tend to get three main claims in those when you do that Google search, three main claims as to why it's December 25th. Now, the one that you read most often in the less detailed articles is it was the feast of Saturnalia. So Saturnalia was this Roman midwinter feast that everyone celebrated. It was a great festival, and it was in late December, and that's where the date comes from.
It sounds like a blast. I don't know if you ever read any accounts of Saturnalia. It sounds like a good time. Yeah.
Saturnalia actually sounds a lot more fun than Christmas. It's kind of like a cross between April Fool's Day and Mardi Gras.
Mardi Gras, yeah.
People would just sort of go a bit crazy, and everything would be turned upside down. There'd be a lot of practical jokes. And a lot of eating and drinking. So Saturnalia was one of the oldest festivals in the Roman religious calendar. Saturn was a very, very ancient god, originally probably from Greece, so the Greek god Kronos, but via the Etruscans. But it's certainly one of the oldest festivals in the Roman calendar, and a lot of stuff in Saturnalia had been done by the Romans for so long they've forgotten the origin, so they didn't really know why they were doing it. So they used to have it would begin with unwrapping a wrapping around the feet of the statue of Saturn in the Temple of Saturn in the Forum. There's all this, and no one would understand what that was about. It was just what we've always done. So they'd actually forgotten the origins. But Saturnalia was, as you say, it was a lot of fun. We'll get back to the customs, but the problem is the date. The date of Saturnalia is December 17th, not December 25th. Now, it kind of expanded and contracted. So it expanded out 3 days, which takes us up to December 19th. It kind of expanded out to 5 days. And to a certain extent, it was still kind of being celebrated for about a week after December 17th. But
those are the hardcore partiers, though.
Well,
yeah,
it got to the point where the Roman emperors had to be like, okay, guys, like
enough.
Saturnalia is done on this day. Like, get back to work.
Yeah. Well, the Emperor Augustus actually did that. He tried to limit it to 3 days and didn't succeed. So it's like bad luck, pal. But the problem is it never extended to December 25th. So as an establishment of the date, we'll come back to the customs in a moment, but as an establishment for the date, it just doesn't work.
And if you were going to do the date of Saturnalia, you do the 17th.
You would.
That's where it starts, right? Like
yeah.
That,
or there's the December 23rd was another major date in that week of festival, but the 25th just wasn't even in the picture. That was after Saturnalia. So when you point this out to people, some people just kind of do a bit of a, well, near enough is good enough. But seriously, as an argument for December 25th, it just doesn't work. Now, the arguments about the Saturnalia customs, we'll get back to in a moment. The other one that you get quite often is that it was the birthday of Mithras. And this is one that I hear a lot, and people have heard of Mithras. He was a very widespread cult, very popular among the Roman soldiers, so therefore, and amongst merchants, so therefore spread throughout the entire empire. So I've been to a Mithraic temple under a Christian church in Rome. It's way down about 4 levels below the church. I've been to another one in London. And there are Mithraic temples up on Hadrian's Wall. They're all over the Roman Empire. So the claim is that December 25th was the birthday of Mithras, and so everyone was having this big public festival, and that's what the Christians stole. The problem here is that there are absolutely no references to Mithras being born on December 25th. None. I'll come back to how this.
That can't be right, because I've seen memes on Twitter that state very definitively that not only was born on 25th, it was a virgin, there were 3 wise men, it's the same thing.
Yeah. He was born of a virgin. I mean, the actual Roman god Mithras was born fully formed by springing out of a rock. Now, maybe the rock was a virgin.
The rock was a virgin. There you go.
But yeah, if you've ever seen those memes, like, he had 12 disciples and he was called the light of the world and all that sort of stuff, it's all crap. Someone's just made all that crap up. So not true. So no, it wasn't the birthday of Mithras. And the idea that people would have been having a big public festival for the birthday of Mithras is nonsense anyway, because Mithraism was a secretive mystery cult. That it was a closed shop, and it was an invite only, men only, largely free men only, exclusive club. It's a bit like the Masons. You had to be invited to join, and it was literally underground. Their temples were either built underground or or situated in caves, or they were buildings that were decorated like caves inside. And the whole part of the mystery was you're going into this dark space, it's torch lit, and people are doing strange things. People are wearing masks, and it's all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't a public religion, and it was a widespread religion, but it wasn't a popular religion because it was invitation only. So the idea that people would have been dancing in the streets for the birth of Mithras, that's just wrong anyway. So that one we can completely dismiss. The one that actually has some credibility and has had some sort of scholarly support is the idea that there was a feast called a Feast of Sol Invictus. So a feast of the birth of the unconquered sun, which is what Sol Invictus was, what it means. The unconquered sun being the sun god and a god associated with victory. And this fell on December 25th. So there was a guy called Hermann Usener back in the 1880s who first sort of put this hypothesis forward, and this is really the basis of the idea that it was stolen from or adapted, changed from a pagan feast day. The Mithras thing actually comes from a confusion because Mithras was also a sun god, was sometimes called Invictus, was sometimes associated with Sol Invictus, and sometimes, or other times, was depicted as being a separate guy, and the two interacting. So it's all a bit confused, but that seems to be where the Mithras thing comes from, people confusing Mithras and Sol Invictus. So what's the evidence for December 25th being the feast of Sol Invictus? Well, what Usener sort of pointed to was a pretty clear statement that this is what's happened. So this statement is by a guy called Jacob, or sometimes Dionysius Barsalibi. He is a Syriac Christian writer, writing way over in the Middle East in the 12th century. And he said the reason then why the fathers of the church moved the January 6th celebration of Jesus' birth to December 25th was this. They say it was a custom of the heathen to celebrate on this same December 25th the birthday of the sun, and they lit lights then to exalt that day. So that seems reasonably straightforward, and this is sort of what Usener was saying. Well, look, here's someone saying this is what they did.
If you can't believe somebody from the 12th century about what they did in the 1st century, then who can you believe, right?
Yeah, you might have picked up on a bit of a problem, but we'll get back to that. There's also a sermon. This is a bit closer to the time. There's a sermon from possibly the early 4th, maybe late 4th century that says, our Lord too is born in the month of December, the 8th before the calends of January. That means 25th of December. But they, the pagans, call it the birthday of the unconquered, so birthday of Invictus. And who is as unconquered as our Lord Jesus? Or if they say that it's the birthday of the sun, we may say that he is the new son of justice. So here we've got another Christian document, a little bit closer to the period we're talking about, that is actually saying, well, there's some correspondence here. But the main piece of evidence that this whole idea rests on is a document called the Calendar or the Chronograph of 354, which, as the name would suggest, it was written in the year 354, and it's kind of a collection of a whole lot of listings of feast days, mainly Christian ones. This is a Christian document, but it does mention some other ones. And part of it is what's called the calendar of Hippolytus, or the Philocilian calendar. And it has a listing that, in abbreviated form, but when it's unabbreviated, reads Natalis Invicti Circensis Missus 30, which means 30 games were ordered for the birthday of the unconquered one. And it's pretty clear that the unconquered one here is Sol Invictus. So this is 30 games. This is chariot races ordered for the birthday of the unconquered one. And why chariot races? Well, because the sun god was associated with the Circus Maximus, the biggest circus in Rome. This is a reference to something that was happening in Rome. And there was a temple to the sun god on the Circus Maximus. And also because the sun was associated with a chariot. And so the sun was supposedly driven in a chariot across the sky. So this seems to be, when you put all this together, this is what Usener did. He didn't just pluck this idea out of nowhere. But he's got, okay, well, here's Barsalibi saying this is what's happened. Here's this 4th century sermon attributed to John Chrysostom saying, yeah, there's an association between these two festivals. And here's a listing in the Philocilian calendar saying, "Yep, we're celebrating the birth of the unconquered sun on December 25th with 30 chariot races."
Well, there you go. That's our show. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, okay,
We were
thanks
wrong.
for having me on. Goodbye.
So I think what we have here is, if anything, at minimum, a history of people always claiming that December 25th was celebrated as Jesus' birthday because somebody else was celebrating on that day, and so we're just going to appropriate it.
So
that's the idea.
honestly, this tradition of misattributing the origins of Christmas is an ancient tradition.
Yeah, because there's a problem with this theory, and the problem is it's based on the assumption that feast of Sol Invictus on December 25th was an ancient feast
That it
and
came
had been
first.
going on for a hell of a long time. And some really great work has been done reasonably recently, so really only about the last sort of 15, 20 years, picking holes in this and pointing out all the problems. Now, I've sent you guys a list of the scholarly literature on
Which
this.
will be in the description.
Which will be in the description. And there's also a great video by Andrew from the Religion for Breakfast podcast, who goes into this in a lot more detail. But just in summary, the problem is it appears from the newer scholarship that the idea that this was an ancient festival that had always been around that the Christians had appropriated is wrong. It appears that what happened is that this was a very new festival and that it wasn't a major festival at all, and that it had only been instituted quite recently before that listing in the calendar of 354. So it's not that there was an ancient festival that the Christians appropriated. In fact, our first references to Jesus being born on December 25th by Christians predate this by over a century, and even predate the most likely point of origin for this new festival. So you'll often see it claimed that there was a declaration by the Emperor Aurelian. So you'll often see it. If you Google this, it says Aurelian instituted the festival of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the invincible sun, on December 25th in the year 274. Sounds really, really definitive. If you Google, if you go look at the wiki article on Sol Invictus, you'll see that stated as a fact with 2 footnotes. So you kind of think, yeah, exactly. You kind of think that there must be a ancient source that says that, except there isn't. In fact, if you follow those 2 footnotes, they're 2 secondary sources that kind of make an argument that that's what may have happened. So Andrew Henry in that video says, look, it possibly was when Aurelian seems to have elevated the sun cult when he was emperor fairly briefly in the mid-3rd century. But it seems that it possibly is is when he instituted this. But that still means 273, that we're decades after the first references that we have in Christian literature to Christ being born on December 25th. So the chronology doesn't work. And this is something that people sometimes get very frustrated with me. And they say, but. And I'll just say, look, show me an earlier reference, earlier than the 220s, which is where we get the first Christian references to Jesus being born on December 25th, for any kind of festival of the sun or anyone else, any kind of religious festival on December 25th, and I'll concede the point. And I've been saying that to people for about 15 years, and so far no one's come up with a single thing, because it doesn't exist. I mean, the scholars have been over this stuff. Stephen Hijmans is the Dutch scholar who has literally written the book on the Roman solar cult. He's written a monumental, great history of sun worship in ancient Rome. He is the man on this, and he's quite clear that there's nothing. He's dubious about the whole Aurelian thing. But even if we grant that the way that Andrew Henry does, it's still too late. So there's a problem, which means that Saturnalia doesn't work, Mithras doesn't work, and Sol Invictus doesn't work. So where did the Christians come up with this idea that Jesus was born on December 25th? Because it doesn't seem to be that they stole a feast day at all.
So do the early Christian writings that you just referenced, do they happen to tell us like how they came up with it? Oh, well, perfect.
Yeah.
They found his birth certificate.
Yeah, that's right. Went back to Bethlehem, and there it was.
They just asked around. There's people, they just, tradition.
Yeah.
Just go to Nazareth.
No, what actually happened was for the early parts of early century or so of Christianity, no one really cared too much. They kind of had a few hints in the Gospels as to when Jesus was. It says in the 15th year of Tiberius and so on. But
I guess when you think like the world's literally going to end next year, probably like niceties like that don't matter so much.
Seems that they didn't care. Once Christianity got a bit bigger and started to include far more learned people started to think about, well, if Jesus dying and rising from the dead is the most significant thing that's ever happened in the whole of human history and in the history of the cosmos, maybe we should work out when it happened and work out what that means. Right. So there was a tradition of what we call cosmological chronography, where this is what they were doing. And the problem, of course, is if you've actually looked at the Gospels, they're kind of contradictory on a whole lot of stuff, including some key stuff about when he died, when he lived, how old he was, all this stuff. So they had a bit of a struggle trying to reconcile it all. So in summary of a lot of evidence, I won't sort of drag you through it all, but effectively what they did was they seem to have come to a consensus on when he died. And they seem to think that they came to a consensus that was March 25th in the year 29 AD. In fact, it was Friday, about tea time. No, it was March 25th in the year 29 AD. Sorry, that was a reference to Life of Brian. But anyway,
great movie. If anybody's not seen it,
it's a caption at the beginning of the movie about tea time. So that's what they came up with by kind of wrestling the contradictory stuff in the Gospels into some kind of order, and doing a little bit of fiddling. So okay, that's when he died, and then they started trying to work back from that as to when he might have been born, via when he might have been conceived. So there was a very old Jewish tradition that great men, particularly prophets, lived what they call perfect lives, and perfect lives were very symmetrical in terms of their lifetime and how they fitted into the cosmology of the universe generally. And one of these elements was that they died on the same date that they were born. Bit of a bummer, you die on your birthday, but anyway, that means you're a prophet and a great man. So they seem to have adapted this, and there were some calculations of the life of Jesus that work from that basis, that work back from him dying on March 25th to he must have been born on March 25th. And there were various other dates kind of kicking around in this period of about the 2nd century through to into the early 3rd century. So Clement of Alexandria came up with the idea that it was November 17th that he was born. But he also mentions that April 19th or May 20th were other options that people had presented, but he said that they were mere speculations. There's another early, or actually mid 3rd century document called the Pascha Computus, or the calculation of Easter, which basically said, well, he must have been born on March 28th because the world was created on March 25th. I won't bore you with how they calculated that. So March 25th. Then in Genesis it says that the sun was created 4 days later. Jesus is the son of the light of the world. Therefore, we get to March 28th. So this is the kind of thinking that they were coming up with. It all sounds totally bonkers to us because it is, but it had a certain weird logic, I think, is what we're trying to get across.
And as you can, if you're listening, it does sound weird to us, but I think the real key takeaway is not that exactly the methodology they're using, but the fact that they felt compelled to use some kind of methodology, and they weren't saying, hey guys, there's this popular festival and we'd get a lot more converts if we took it, and clearly it's not like they were picking festival days. And so like there were other competing days to December 25th for disparate reasons.
Yeah. So. And also, but just to go back to the whole Sol Invictus thing, even when it was instituted, it wasn't a particular popular festival. It wasn't a big deal. There were much bigger feasts of the unconquered sun that were much bigger deals. So if you're going to pick a festival for your birth of Jesus, they picked a strange one. They probably should have picked one of the ones in August or one of the ones in October, which were much bigger feasts. Anyway, so how did they get from he died on March 25th to he was born on December 25th? Well, what they seem to have done, and there's evidence to connect to this, is they moved the concept of a great prophet is born on the same day date that he dies to is conceived. So in Jesus' case, because the miraculous conception of Jesus is the much more cosmologically and historically significant event, they decided that he was conceived on March 25th. Well, that's why to this day in most major Christian traditions, March 25th is the feast of the Annunciation. That's the feast where the angel, appeared to Mary and said, "Bingo, you're pregnant." And
surprise!
Yeah, big surprise. And that's why that's the feast of the Annunciation, sometimes traditionally called Lady Day. So conceived on March 25th. 9 months from March 25th, because being Jesus, he had a perfect gestation period of exactly 9 months. Conceived on March 25th, go forward 9 months and you get to December 25th. Now, the interesting thing about this is there are all these other dates competing with this, and that's what actually Basilibi was talking about. He was talking about, why did they abandon the correct date, which was, the January 7th, and adopt this December 25th date. So why did this one be the one that kind of stuck? And that's because it seems to fit with the seasons of the year. He's conceived on March 25th. That's the vernal equinox. Then he's born on December 25th. That's the winter solstice. Now, astronomically, it isn't, but because the Julian calendar kind of slipped a few days every now and then, these are the dates that they came up with as being the traditional fixed dates on which we mark these equinoxes. March 25th was the spring equinox, the vernal equinox. December 25th was the winter equinox, or the winter solstice. And they even kind of went a little bit further and came up with similar calculations for John the Baptist. So John the Baptist, they reckon, was conceived on September 24th. That's the autumn equinox, and then was born on June 24th, which is the summer. So, and that's St. John's Day to this day, the longest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. So what you've got is Jesus coming, John then receding, and they even referenced in the Gospel of John 3:30, where John the Baptist says, of Jesus, he must increase and I must decrease. So Jesus is born in the depth of winter, and then the days start to lengthen from that point onwards. So why did these dates stick? Because it seemed to make Jesus cosmographically significant, and because the cycle of the year, and we're talking about people who didn't live in air-conditioned buildings and heated buildings and drive around in heated cars, they lived a whole lot closer to the seasons than we do. So this stuff was significant to them. You looked at when the days were going to start lengthening because you were cold. You celebrated the longest day of the year because it was a great thing to actually be in a period of warmth and abundance. So this seems to be why it stuck, and this seems to be why it was December 25th that won out rather than any of those other dates, not a pagan feast day.
I think that's an important point of to drive home, is that you can have convergent evolution, so to speak, because Christians lived in the same world that pagans did, the same world that had the same solstices and had the same equinoxes and had all the same seasons. They lived in the same world. And so it wouldn't be stealing to say for both cultures to ascribe some kind of important thing to this mutually observed thing. They're just both living in the same context.
Yeah. Right. There's a British scholar called Eleanor Parker who last year or year before, I think, put out a book on the festivals of the Anglo-Saxon year, so the early medieval year. And she makes exactly that point. She gets very cross with, quite angry with people who talk about Christians stealing all these feast days. She said, look, these were the days in which you were going to have festivals,
right?
Just simply because of the cycle of the year. It just makes sense. I mean, of course you're going to have a festival around about the beginning of autumn, because you've just got the harvest in, so you've got a whole lot of food in the barn. Of course you're going to be eating pork in midwinter, because you can't keep that pig over the whole of the winter and you run out of acorns. So that's when you kill the pig. So that's why we eat pork and ham at Christmas. So it actually all makes sense without it just sort of being something as simplistic as they stole. I mean, we know that they did do some stealing. Gregory the Great said, go and steal with pride. It was sort of his instruction.
And one other thing that I think also gets missed, because a lot of atheists in our dialogue are Western, Americans or like Western world, that not all Christians celebrate Christmas on December 25th. Just like there's a whole church in the Orthodox Church celebrates it on the 7th. And so and they had Saturnalia too. So like if
yeah, so it doesn't, and this is what I mean. That very late source that I referred to as well, the Barcelebi source. That's what he's saying. He's saying, well, why do these Westerners do it the wrong way? Well, they're stupid. They just adopted a pagan festival. We celebrate it on the right day. That's why that's not actually very good evidence that this is what happened. So
when you're looking at some of those things, do we have references in some of the early church fathers to specifically mention the date December 25th? Is that? I mean, I'm sure this is all bore out in the literature, but are there prominent?
Yeah. So that's a good point. So from the early 3rd century, you're really getting, this is when you get the first references to it. But from then on, particularly in the Western tradition, that becomes sort of the date that everyone kind of settles on, and then we start to get references to actual celebrations on that date. So in the calendar or the chronograph of 354. That's the one that mentions the chariot races on December 25th. In another part of that same thing, it says, oh, by the way, this is when Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. So the same document that talks about the Feast of Sol Invictus is also talking about Jesus being born on December 25th. So, it was pretty much established from that point on. And then on, after that, everyone just sort of accepted it. St. Augustine, writing in the 5th century, makes the explicit that stuff I was just talking about the conception being on March 25th, therefore the birth being on December 25th, and explicitly says it's because obviously he's reflecting the equinoxes because he's the Lord of creation. Well, so it's all exactly. So it's all pretty clear as far as they're concerned. Certainly by the 4th century, quite clear.
And if anything we know from church history and even the Hebrew scriptures is there's a prominent theme of numbers and numerology and cycles and all of these things having an importance. So it would make sense that if they're trying to backdate this, they would use some of the similar methods to try to figure out.
Yeah.
Which and not to kind of shift the mindset a little bit. It's not like they're trying to lie and make stuff up. If you look at it through their eyes, this is, like you said, the most important thing to have ever happened. And if something important like that is going to happen, it's going to happen on an important day, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the logic of this has, the logic sounds a bit weird in this context, but their logic actually has all kinds of precedents in earlier types of calculation. So you're absolutely right. In the articles that I've sent to you that you can link to, Philipp Nothaft goes into that stuff in what can only be described as exhaustive detail. So what I've done is summarize like a huge chunk of scholarship. This stuff is very, very complicated, but the summary, I think, is pretty well established. Not all scholars fully accept this, but I think it's starting to replace the old theory because it just works better. It makes more sense. So,
And even if we didn't know how they landed on the date December 25th, what we can say from all this is that they weren't appropriating pagan holidays.
that's got all kinds of problems. So yes, I think we can certainly say that. We can definitely say that about Saturnalia because the dates don't work, and we can say it about Mithras because that's just total bullshit. And on Sol Invictus, the evidence just lines up better for this calculation theory.
I think the most you could say is that, like you said, they had competing dates, and one had to win out, and it could be that one of the factors that made it win out is it was kind of at a natural time when festivals are going to happen anyway, so it makes sense. But that's not the same thing as stealing a holiday.
No, absolutely not. And midwinter is a good time in Europe. Is a good time to stop and have a party because it's kind of like a bit of a dead time as far as
what else are you going to do?
Farm work, exactly.
I've played Stardew Valley. Then what do you do in the winter?
That's right. It's cold, and you don't want to be doing anything else. And you've hopefully you've had a good harvest. You've got food in the larder. So and that's sort of what seems to be going on.
So let's move on to the traditions part, because you said this one might have some grounding. Some of them.
Some. Okay. So on this one, like you hear it all the time. You hear like Saturnalia was basically Christmas. I mean, everyone they used to dress up in their best clothes. They'd have a big party. Everyone would drink. You invite your friends over. You buy people gifts. You play games. You decorate your house with greenery. So you use holly and ivy and mistletoe and all that stuff. And it was all a festival of Saturn, and Saturn was an old man with a white beard who wore a red robe and used to give gifts to children. And you bring a tree into your house and you decorate the tree. It's Christmas, right? Sounds like Christmas. The only problem is about half the things I just said are complete crap. So half the things I just said are not found anywhere in the sources relating to Saturnalia. The other half are. So the ones that are complete crap, no, Saturn wasn't depicted as an old man with a white beard and a red robe who gave gifts to children. In fact, Saturn ate his children, so probably not.
He gave them the gift of death.
Yeah, the gift of cannibalism. Kronos ate his children. I don't know if the Romans had a similar legend, but anyway, Saturn wasn't Santa. Okay, the other stuff. Yes, they did decorate their homes with greenery because that's kind of what you do when you're having a party. And I found no references to anyone at Saturnalia using holly, ivy, or mistletoe. Laurel seems to be the favoured decoration. People did get dressed up. The Romans were pretty stuffy and conservative. So one of the things that you could do at Saturnalia was go out on the street wearing the kind of casual gear that you would wear at a feast or a party at home, where instead of wearing your formal toga, you could wear sort of like this sort of more colourful and casual, more fashionable clothing. And at Saturnalia, that was fine. Other times of the year, particularly if you were a higher ranking Roman, that would have been considered the wrong thing to do. The partying is very much part of it. We talked about it before. Saturnalia was not actually so much like Christmas, a bit more like Mardi Gras, but with a lot of element of April Fool's Day. So there was a lot of tricking going on. There were a lot of jokes. There was a lot of inversion.
Yeah, reversal of roles was a big
part. Yeah. So there was this idea that a slave could say stuff over the course of the period of Saturnalia to their master that they couldn't say any other time of year. Now, obviously, slaves would probably have to pick what they said fairly carefully because
they're going to be a slave still in a week. Yeah.
So unless you were a stupid slave, you had to pick what you said. But it was considered okay to do that stuff. There are two elements to Saturnalia which I think we could say are more than just parallel. So the eating and drinking and all that sort of stuff, that's what you do at a festival. So to say we do that and they did that, therefore it's derived from that, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know too many festivals that consist of people sitting around in a bare room staring at the floor. So
bad weddings, but
I've been to those weddings. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty common. But two things: the gift giving and the inversion games, so the Lord of Misrule games. I think the Lord of Misrule type game that has been associated with Christmas, it's not a big part of Christmas these days, but traditionally always was, possibly does have some connection to Saturnalia. So in Saturnalia, there was a game called the Saturnalian Princeps, Princeps meaning sort of prince or principal person. And in the game, what happens is someone who is normally quite low in the hierarchy would be selected or elected as the Saturnalia Princeps. So it might be a slave, it might be a child, and they would be in charge, and they could tell people what to do, and everyone, including the head of the household, had to do what they said. It's kind of fun. It was regarded as bad form to make the person do something embarrassing or something that they wouldn't enjoy. So it's got to be in good
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. One story about the Emperor Nero was that he did that. He humiliated one of his relatives, and everyone thought that made him a bit of a prick because he was Nero. He was a bit of a prick. So that was the game. In traditional Christmas practice, we see something very similar. So we see the traditions of misrule. We see people playing pranks and tricks on each other. We see this at other times of year as well, Halloween being the obvious one. We still have the trick-or-treat tradition. But at Christmas time, you would elect or select a Lord of Misrule, and the Lord of Misrule would be a bit like the Saturnalia Princeps, would tell people to do silly things and everyone would laugh. In cathedrals, the whole community of the cathedral would elect a boy bishop. So a cathedral had the bishop at the top, and then there were the canons and the deacons and the archdeacons and everyone, including right down to the choir boys. The youngest choir boy would be selected and enthroned and crowned as the boy bishop for the day, for Christmas Day. And the boy bishop would then order everyone, including the bishop, around, and again, everyone would have a bit of a laugh. This is a period where bishops were on the same level as barons, dukes, and earls, just below kings. So, it was a fun game. Now, is there a direct connection? There's no evidence of a direct connection, but there's a very strong parallel. Doesn't mean that the two things are connected. I think we can say it's a maybe. But then again, hierarchical societies tend to have pressure valve traditions that allow for some kind of mockery or some kind of release from the usual hierarchy. So your court jesters were sort of basically that. They could say what everyone else was thinking, and everyone could have a laugh because it was okay, and the king wasn't able to do anything to him. So could it be something that just arose in parallel? That's possible as well. So I don't think there's a definite connection. The other one, though, that you often see stated quite strongly as being derived from Saturnalia is the gift giving. Now, a lot of the gift giving at Saturnalia was kind of a joke. People would give each other gifts which were kind of stupid. Coins from far off kingdoms that didn't have any value, bad poems from poets they knew that you hated, that kind of stuff. So there was part of the jokey side of Saturnalia, but there is also people also gave gifts that people wanted. It's a bit like us. The problem, though, is that our gift-giving tradition at Christmas doesn't derive from that in any way that we can actually be traced. In fact, it wasn't originally associated with Christmas at all. It was associated with the feast of St. Nicholas, which is on December 6th. So, and this is why, the remnant of that is the fact that we get presents from Santa Claus, because Santa Claus is the anglicisation of Sinterklaas, which is the Dutch form of Saint Nicholas. So people used to get gifts on St. Nicholas's Day, and that was on December 6th. And the reason for that is in the Middle Ages, there were a whole lot of stories told about the various saints. The ones about St. Nicholas were about two things. One, his generosity, and two, his love of children. So there's one story which I really loved when I was a kid about a butcher who couldn't afford to buy pork, and so he kidnapped some children, killed them, chopped them up, and salted their meat and tried to sell the meat.
Like one does.
Pork. Yeah. So Nicholas, because he used his magic saintly powers to work out what had gone on, raised the children from the dead, and then the children accused the butcher of murder, and so he was killed. lovely story.
What a heartwarming Christmas tale.
Around kids, hear this tale of cannibalism. So he was kind of short. The other one was another story, which was about a poor man who had 3 daughters, and he was saying that he had to sell them into slavery because he couldn't afford their dowries, which is the payment that a father made to the husband when the daughter married. And so Nicholas overheard this, and so he came back to this guy's house that night and threw 3 bags of gold through the window so that he rescued these girls from being sold into slavery. Interestingly, I never realized it, but when I was a kid, every Christmas in our Christmas stocking, we would get a little mesh bag of chocolate coins covered in gold foil. And I had no idea why. It was just, I was like eating the chocolate coins, but that's actually a reference to the St. Nicholas legend. So this meant that there was a tradition of giving gifts, mainly to kids, on December 6th. And it drifted into giving gifts on December 25th. But that happened quite recently. That really has only happened in the last couple of 100 years.
So what you're saying is Christians appropriated their own holidays.
Yeah.
They stole it from St. Nicholas. Yeah. I think that's a mistake that it's easy to make, is kind of assuming that the way you do it now is the way it's kind of always been. Like, this is what Christmas is, and Christmas is a static thing that has preserved through the ages, when in fact that's not the case at all.
We'll come back to that, I think, when we're talking about Christmas trees. But yeah, I mean, the leaps of logic are basically, if it's done now and it's tradition, it's been done for a long time. It's an old tradition, which is not true. Most of our Christmas traditions only date back to the 19th century. And then there's the assumption, well, if it was done for a long time, it must be pre-Christian, which is also not true. Most of our old traditions are actually Christian in origin. And then if it was pre-Christian, it must be pagan. It must have some pagan significance, which again is not necessarily true. So there's a series of leaps. It seems to make sense, but actually when you unpack it, it kind of doesn't.
So let's talk about the tree. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
So the tree thing you said is, I think, another thing that's very commonly associated because it just kind of feels pagan. You know, you got an evergreen tree and you're decorating it.
Just before we move on to the tree, because the tree ones are really, really quite interesting, but just still on the gift giving, there is another gift giving tradition around Christmas time mainly in Southern Europe. So the St. Nicholas thing is mainly Northern Europe. And that's associated with the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th. And that's the feast where the Magi, the 3 wise men, the Bible doesn't actually say there's 3, but the Magi turn up at Jesus' stable Jesus' house. This is in the Gospel of Matthew, and gives him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So there's another gift-giving tradition, which is in January. It's more in Southern Europe and also the Eastern, the Orthodox tradition. And the person who gives the gifts are not, a saint, St. Nicholas. It's the Magi. So the Magi turn up in the night, come down your chimney or whatever, and give you presents. That one it's still around. You still find it in Greece, parts of Italy, and Spain, but it doesn't seem to be the origin of our Christmas gift tradition, and it doesn't seem to be connected to Saturnalia. It's too late. It's all the way in January. So, I mean, I had this. I was talking to you before about how I had this, vigorous exchange on Twitter a couple of days ago with Neil Sendak from the Gnostic Informant channel, who was vigorously arguing, well, there's a gift-giving tradition in Saturnalia, and Saturnalia is kind of like this broad season, and here are these 2 other gift-giving traditions. They've got to be connected. And I'll say maybe, but I'm not see it as compelling. I think people give gifts to each other all the time. We do it on our birthdays, we do it on anniversaries, we do it at graduation.
Right.
The Indian people do it at Diwali, Jewish people do it at Hanukkah. It's just something that humans do.
Yeah. Just like the feasting thing. Yeah.
Yeah, this parallels must mean derivations thing. I just don't get it. But for some people, if it's a parallel, it must be connected.
There's just humans do stuff. Like we sing, we dance, we drink, we eat, we give gifts. It's just things humans do,
So Christmas trees, as you say, Christmas trees look really pagan. I mean, there's nothing particularly Christian about getting a pine tree and covering it in tinsel and baubles, and it must be pagan. And people sort of say, well, the pagan people had had sacred trees. Trees are sacred in a lot of cultures. So it must be, you see it stated, this was done at Yule. So this is a northern European version of the whole Saturnalia thing. So in Northern Europe, in the Germanic Norse tradition, you had Yule. So we often get this claim that Yule fell on December 25th, that people would decorate their houses, their halls with boughs of holly, fa la la, and ivy and mistletoe, and this was a pagan thing. And they would set up a tree and they decorate it. This is all pagan. You also get people claiming that the Norse-Germanic god Odin or Woden was the origin of Santa. So he has a white beard.
I thought it was Saturn. It was just Saturn a minute ago.
Yeah, I know. But forget about that. This is another. And he wore a red cloak, and he rode on an 8-legged horse, which is the origin of Santa's 8 reindeer. Okay, it's not a reindeer; it's a horse. But anyway, he flew through the sky, and he distributed gifts to children. So again, here's Christmas. We've got holly, ivy, trees, Santa, gifts, chimneys, all this stuff. Again, half of what I just said is true, and the other half is completely made up crap. So let's start with Odin. I'll get to trees. But let's start with Odin. Odin was not a god of kindly god who distributed presents to children. Odin was a weird, scary, sometimes quite evil motherfucker. He was a god of magic, a god of war. He was a scary character.
Again, giving the gift of death.
Yeah, the only gifts that you get Odin giving in Norse mythology are swords, and he gives
hammers.
That was Thor. But swords were he used to give people swords, and they would then go on to be great warriors and become kings and so on. And then in the middle of a battle, Odin would turn up and would touch the sword with his spear, and the sword would shatter or disappear, and the great warrior would then die. So he was a fickle sort of a guy, old Odin, but he was not kindly, and there is no tradition at all of Odin giving gifts to children. There's dubious evidence that he ever did any kind of flying. There's no connection between his 8-legged horse and 8 reindeer. The whole reindeer thing is a much later addition to the Santa story anyway. It doesn't pop up until the 18th century. So that's all basically complete crap. Did people celebrate Yule? Yeah, they did. But Yule wasn't a day. Yule was kind of a period. In fact, the entire month around midwinter was called Yule or Yule or various versions of that. Still is in Scandinavia. So Yule basically is just a term meaning midwinter. People did have feasts in midwinter. They do seem to have had religious significance, and we just don't know much about them. But we do have references to Christians, and when Scandinavia began to convert to Christianity, refusing to take part in the Yule feast because they associated it with paganism. And the main thing they ate was pork. So the main thing they ate was either wild boar or pigs. And for the reason I mentioned before, you had to kill most of your animals before winter because you couldn't feed them through the winter. But one animal you could keep alive, there were two actually. One was pigs because you could feed them on acorns. And then you'd kill them in midwinter because you were running out of acorns. So, of course, you had fresh meat in the middle of winter. You eat pork. Also, the ones you killed earlier, you would salt. So you had ham. And this is why we eat ham and pork at Christmas time. A lot of people do. The other animal that you could keep into the winter was geese, because geese will eat bloody anything. They're kind of like the goats of the bird world. And that's why roast goose was a traditional Christmas dinner until it was supplanted by turkeys, because turkeys had much more meat on them. Yeah. So some of this stuff is pre-Christian. Some of it does seem to be pagan. So the pork thing does seem to be a holdover from paganism, but it's also a practical thing. You got a pig. You've still got a pig in the middle of winter, so you get to eat fresh meat.
Same so is it pagan? The holly, like decorating with green stuff, like it's winter. If you look outside in winter, what is colorful and green? That's it. Like, what else are you going to use? You know,
that's your whole decorating palette: holly, ivy,
the evergreens,
and mistletoe. And so people often sort of say, yeah, but mistletoe had all this magical significance, and so it kind of did, but everything did. Like, if you look hard enough, you can find a story or a bit of folklore about pretty much every plant, tree, rock, animal, you name it. So this is where it starts to get, well, is it really religious in significance? Or as you say, if you're going to decorate your home in the middle of winter in northern Norway, the number of things you're going to use are pretty limited, unless you're going to use bare sticks.
Yeah.
It's going to be this stuff.
You just like the Blair Witch Project all over your house. It's like
it brings us to mistletoe, because we got the tradition of kissing under mistletoe. And if you get online and Google the origin of that, you'll quite often find this story about how Freya, the queen of the gods in Norse mythology, loved her son Balder before over everyone else. He was the most beautiful of the gods. So she went around the whole of creation and got everything, rocks, trees, fire, swords, to promise not to hurt him so that he would live forever. And everything made this promise to her. And as a result, he was completely invulnerable. So then all the gods thought this was a great laugh, and they were standing around one day, stabbing him with swords and burning him with fire and, trying to strangle him, and nothing would kill him. And they all thought this was really fun. And then along came Loki, because Loki's an arsehole. And the one thing that she didn't bother making swear this oath was mistletoe, because mistletoe is a scraggly parasitic weed that lives on trees. And Loki made a little dart out of mistletoe and threw it at Balder and killed him, because Loki's an arsehole. And so that story is found in the Prose Edda, which is a collection of where we get most of our Viking myths from the 13th century. But then you get this bit that people then sort of say, well, and then she said that after that, anyone who kissed under mistletoe would get their true love wish made true, which does make a whole lot of sense as an ending to that story. The story ends with the guy dying.
And if so we're going to bless the thing that killed him?
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because it's not found in any of the original versions of that story. It's something that someone's made up to try and use as a pagan ancient explanation for the whole kissing under the mistletoe tradition. The kissing under the mistletoe tradition first pops up in England in the 18th century. There's no references to it anywhere before that. It seems to be something that was invented as a way for some guy to, convince a girl to kiss him. It seems to imagine an 18th century party. There's a guy who's spotted a pretty girl. This guy, let's call him, I don't know, Richard Carrier, decides to go and try and kiss this girl and convinces her that there's this ancient tradition. That was naughty, but anyway.
No connection to people living or dead.
Just the first name that came into my head. Anyway, he then goes and gets sleazy with this girl and says, "Oh no, this is an ancient tradition that's been around for centuries."
Haven't you heard about mistletoe? That's a thing.
You got to do it. You got to do it.
Trust me, baby. Come and stand under this. So, was it pagan in origin? No, almost certainly not. Which brings us to Christmas trees. So again, as you said, they look really pagan. What the hell is going on? And again, there is a story about the origin of Christmas trees that links it back to pagan sacred trees. So in Western Germany, Northern Germany, in the area of what's now Saxony, these guys were among the last people in that part of Europe, continental Europe, to convert to Christianity. And there was a saint called St. Boniface, who was an English saint, came over to Germany. And he was a bit of a spoilsport. He cut down their sacred oak tree, which was called the Irminsul. And he then said, and according to this story, he then said, but in order for you to still be able to enjoy your sacred tree at Christmas time to celebrate the birth of Jesus, we'll have a decorated tree instead. Now, again, the problem with that story is the first part of it does actually date back to the 7th, 8th century, and this does seem to be something that St. Boniface did. He did go around cutting down sacred trees in Saxony.
Jerk.
And then, annoying, he got killed in the end.
Okay, fair enough.
Another happy ending, yay. But the last bit about this is the origin of the Christmas tree is some bullshit that someone has made up quite recently. So when you see this stuff online, you have to be really careful, because it looks like, I've had people say to me, here's the origin of the Christmas tree. And I have to say, okay, show me that in a medieval source. It doesn't. You don't get that version until the 18th, 19th century, where people were working from the assumption that all this stuff had a pagan origin, and then were frustrated by the fact that they couldn't find any evidence, so they made it up. Right? Same with the Santa Claus thing. Same with the mistletoe thing. So where did they come from? Well, the short answer is we don't absolutely know, but there's a kind of a line of evidence. So we start to get references to Christmas trees, sort of passing references to them in about the 15th century in mainly sort of Western Germany and around like the Rhineland area. So we get some references to Christmas trees being sold in markets in December. Fir trees being sold in markets seems to be what it's indicating, that people are actually starting to buy them and set them up. There's also a law in the same sort of area saying, hey, it's illegal to go onto other people's property and cut down trees to take home and decorate. Don't do that or we'll fine you. So obviously that was something people were doing.
You don't have a law against something unless people are doing it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So they're selling them in the markets. Other people are going and stealing them from other people's lands. Obviously, it's becoming reasonably common in this part of Germany. What's the origin? Well, we don't know for certain, but what seems to have happened is earlier, so in the 13th and 14th century in this part of Germany, on Christmas Eve, there would be a short play that would be put on for the congregation after Mass on Christmas Eve, so after church, on the steps of the church or in the square outside. And it was a play about Adam and Eve. So two people dressed in leather costumes to simulate nakedness, because you don't want to actually get naked in Germany in the middle of winter. They would come out playing Adam and Eve, and they would stand under a tree, and they would have the whole picking the fruit thing, and then the angel would turn up and the angel would say naughty and would kick them out of the Garden of Eden, and the play would finish with the angel saying to everyone, but a second Adam will be born one day in the future who will restore paradise and save us all, which is a reference obviously to Jesus. And then, of course, the next day you have Christmas Day, which celebrates the birth of Jesus. The one prop in this play was a tree. You're in Germany in the middle of winter, so if you want a tree with some kind of greenery on it, it's a fir tree, and it would be decorated with red balls to symbolize the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What seems to have happened is that people associated that tree with Christmas, and there are references to it as the tree of paradise, and connect sometimes Christmas trees in the early literature were called trees of paradise. To this day, the most common decoration on a Christmas tree are red balls. That's why. And I was in Germany quite a few years ago, but I was in Germany just before Christmas, and they have these great, I was in Mainz, they have these great Christmas markets, gingerbread houses and amazing wooden toys and so on, but lots of Christmas decorations. And I came across one which was a wooden plaque painted with a depiction of Adam and Eve standing under a very coniferous-looking tree covered in red balls. And this is something that you would hang on your Christmas tree. So it seems that the memory of that connection between the Adam and Eve tradition and the Christmas tree tradition actually has survived to a certain extent. But on the whole, what basically happened was that people started setting up Christmas trees in their own homes. This then spread to other places, but it didn't become the ubiquitous symbol of Christmas that we have today until the 19th century. So Queen Victoria of Great Britain was German. She's from the House of Windsor, which is a nice change of name from the original name of the family, the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. So it's a German family.
A little bit harder on the tongue.
Yeah, and just a little bit foreign for the British. And she married a German prince, Prince Albert. So they spoke German at home. They celebrated Christmas in the German style, and they would have a magnificent Christmas tree up at Balmoral in Scotland, where the royal family celebrated Christmas. In the mid-19th century, people started there were productions of illustrated magazines, so with lithographic woodcuts or engravings, and they depicted Queen Victoria and Prince Albert and the kids around this beautiful Christmas tree, and that's where it caught on. So again, lots of people think because we all have Christmas trees in our home at Christmas, that must have always happened, and therefore it must have happened for a long time, therefore it must go back to something pagan. And the answer is that's not true. It popped up in Germany in the Middle Ages, no connection that we can find to anything earlier, and it's only become popular in the last 150 years. So sorry, Christmas trees are not pagan. There's a couple of things I think possibly are, but they never kind of get mentioned. In Scandinavia, at Christmas time, one of the most common decorations is the Yule goat. And it's a goat made out of straw. Usually, traditionally, it should be made out of the straw from the last sheaf from the last harvest. So straw from the last sheaf of wheat, barley, oats. And it's twisted into the shape of a goat, tied with red ribbons or red cord. And you either hang it on your door, you sit it in your house. These days, many people hang them on their Christmas tree. I can't find any Christian origin of the Yule goat. And I think the Yule goat probably is a pagan survival. But you never hear about it.
Well, it's not American, so.
Well, there you are. Yeah, that's right. So I think, what can we say is pagan about Christmas? Maybe eating pork is pagan. The holly and the ivy stuff, maybe, but is it really pagan or is it just pre-Christian? I think it's pre-Christian. The gift-giving tradition might be connected to Saturnalia, but on the whole, I don't think so. I think it arose separately. And the Lord of Misrule tradition, which I think should be revived, by the way. I think that sounds like a lot of fun. That possibly was connected to Saturnalia, but again, we don't know. The date, however, isn't.
Yeah. If we're looking at these things that could possibly be pagan, the one thing we can say is that it very well just could be that was something people were doing around that time, and they just said, "Well, I'm celebrating Christmas," and they're celebrating both at the same time or something, and they. But it's not like they were looking out and saying, because a lot of times the claim is made that people saw somebody doing something that was pagan and they said, we're Christians now. You can't do that. So now that's a Christian thing, which is probably not what happened.
And I think it's not the same. It's not the same feel. Like, I don't think it's stealing per se to have like cultural, like cross feeding. Like that's a normal human thing. Like I'm having a Christmas party, but hey,
syncretism.
that Lord of Misrule thing, that looks like fun,
It's more a matter of continuity. I mean, Christianity in its early centuries had a kind of an ambiguous relationship with the paganism around it. In some ways, there was a lot of that's pagans that don't do it. So I mentioned Clement of Alexandria coming up with various dates for Christmas. There was also in his time there was a bit of an idea that birthdays were a pagan thing and not something that you should do because it was too associated with paganism. Obviously, they got over that. But there was a strain in early Christianity that said if it's a pagan thing, you shouldn't do it. But then again, at the same time, we do see Jesus being depicted as a pagan-style philosopher with the beard and the long hair, which is where that comes from. We also see him being depicted as a sun god. So we see him being depicted with like a radiant crown, which is kind of one of the possible origins of halos. So there was syncretism, but I think a lot of it was kind of just cultural continuity. What have we always done at this time of year? Well, we've always had a bit of a party. So we'll just have a bit of a party and we'll do it on December 25th, whereas before we were doing it on December 17th. Not much of a difference. So I think there probably was some continuity. But the whole, like, they stole Christmas as some kind of major political move, it's too simplistic. And there's no evidence. So, yeah, probably not.
And so I think at this point we've established that they didn't steal it in the way that atheists commonly use it as a bludgeon, right?
Yep.
But even if we granted it, even if they did steal Christmas trees and feasts and like everything else, it still doesn't really mean anything. They just took some cool stuff. Like
some people seem to think it is. Just yesterday, Bill Maher on his TV show, whatever it's called, Real Talk or whatever it's called,
Real Time.
Real Time. That's the one. He began a segment on Christmas, and the segment was mainly on Christian nationalism and the lunatics that you have in your Congress and your friendly neighborhood fundamentalists.
One fewer. George Santos just got booted, so one fewer.
Good to hear. Yeah. Now he's going to spill the beans apparently on everyone else, which could be fun. That was what the segment was about. But he led into it with this thing about, well, we make this big deal of Christmas, but here are all these other gods that were born on December 25th, Osiris and Horus and Mithras and all this stuff. And it's all crap. Horus's birthday was not on December 25th. We've got no idea if anyone ever had a birthday for Mithras or a date. We've got no idea for any of these other, Dionysus is the other one he says we don't know. He was born 3 times anyway, so which date do you pick? And we know when Osiris's birthday was, and it wasn't December 25th. But you get this all the time. And on Twitter, this time of year, inevitably the memes come out of, Mithras wearing a Santa Claus hat and all the claims about December 25th and 12 disciples and so on. It doesn't matter how many times you debunk it. There are dickheads out there who will just post that stuff as though it proves something. And look, please don't. Anyone watching, please don't post that crap. It's nonsense.
If we're going to be good skeptics, then we should try our best to distance ourselves from tribalism and to examine claims. I'd say not just only claims, but particularly claims that come from our own tribe, because we're humans, and one of the biases that we tend to have is a bias towards the people that agree with us. And so we want to fit in. We want to repeat the things that they think. We also want to show the other guy's an idiot. And so if you hear claims that fit what you would like to be true,
check them.
Exactly.
The other reason I beg people not to post those memes is that when they do get posted, people tag me, and then I have to spend time out of my day debunking it, it ruins my Christmas.
Well, now you can just post this video, and then there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say one last thing about that. The other part of not posting that stuff or engaging with that kind of stuff as an atheist is one of the things that I'm really passionate about is normalizing atheism and making atheism something that's not a scary thing. And if atheists are always out there pushing this like gotcha mentality at poking at Christians, it just kind of perpetuates that cycle of us being
particularly when the Christians can respond correctly and saying that's wrong. It's totally counterproductive to try and attack Christianity with stuff that's bullshit. So
there's plenty of legitimate reasons to attack Christianity. You don't need to make up new ones.
Exactly. Just one thing I do want to say is that on the History for Atheists video channel and podcast, I'm going to have Philipp Nothaft, who's one of the scholars whose papers on the calculation theory I'm getting you guys to recommend. That's a pretty dense paper. But if you want to hear me sort of get Philipp, who's a scholar from Oxford, so it's a bit of a good thing that he's coming on my show. He's a good debunker, but I'm going to get him to walk us through the detail of the calculation theory and the evidence behind it. It's probably going to be a bit less lighthearted than this show, but for those who want to get down into the weeds and the detail, that could be, I don't know. I mean, Philipp could be a lot of fun. I don't know. We'll see.
If you want to hear more details, or if you are one of the many commenters who seem to get personally offended by the fact that we laugh and have fun, then that link to that show will be in the description. A link to the channel, and if I remember, I will try to remember when the show actually comes out. I'll link it directly to the show.
Yeah, it's going to be on Sunday the 17th in my world. So Saturday I'll post it sometime in that week before Christmas. So it'll be my Christmas present to the world, a dense discussion of chronographical theology and exegesis.
What more could one want?
One of the world's
Christmas?
leading scholars. What more could one want for Christmas?
Well, thanks for coming on, Tim. Really appreciate it. I highly recommend people check out your channel and the work you do. It's all very well cited. So even if you don't agree with what Tim has to say, you can at least use it as a springboard for scholarship.
Exactly.
Highly recommend that. If we don't talk to you before then, which we should, if you're liking and subscribing like you should be, but if we don't talk to you before then, have a Merry Christmas. And remember, you've always got reason to doubt.
Peace out.
See ya.